Hello, students. Welcome back. It is now week 9. Hopefully, you're well rested after the midterm. Um, I know you guys are anxiously awaiting your grades on the midterm. I should be done by the end of this week. They take a lot of time, a lot of effort goes into grading them, so be patient. I'll have them done pretty soon for you. As well as your just overall grades, those will be done as well. But this week, we're looking at Japanese music, idols, and more. And so this week, you were assigned to watch the documentary Tokyo Idols, where you follow a few Japanese idols and learn about what really goes on. And so let's just get this out of the way. Look at the pictures here. You got a couple of 10-year-old girls dancing and singing for 40-year-old men on a school night. Yeah, okay, Japan. That's kind of how I feel about it, but that's very judgmental, and that's not the approach that I want you to take. It's more of a do what I say, not what I do type of thing. But I really want you to approach this with an open mind. Try to understand what purpose it's serving, why is this even a thing? Why does this exist? Because everything has a purpose. It wouldn't be out there if it wasn't if people didn't want it, and there has to be a reason. It has to be filling a need. And so I really want you to just go in with an open mind. Forget the fact that there are 40-year-old men interacting with elementary school girls. But you try to understand. The world is different. Each country has its own way of doing things, and that's part of one of the things that you should take away from this class is just the understanding that not everyone is going to do things the way that you do. Not everyone's going to have the same values. Not everyone's going to think the same way that you do, and that doesn't make them wrong. It just makes them different. And that the best thing that you could do is at least try to understand where they're coming from. So that's that. Yeah. So we're going to talk about Japanese music. And the reason why we're talking about Japanese music and not just J-pop is because Japan, unlike South Korea, didn't really, at least in the case of rock and I guess R&B, when they adopted those styles from the United States, from the West, had more of a purist approach to the music. So rock kind of really stayed rock, and R&B really stayed R&B. Whereas in South Korea, you got the fusion. There was this magical recipe that everything was K-pop, and technically everything is J-pop. J-rock is technically a subgenre of J-pop, J-R&B. I don't even know if that's a term. Also subgenre, but I'd say that the genres are more distinct in Japan than you would see in South Korea, and that's why you don't really hear too much about South Korean rock. South Korean hip hop is a thing, but it's still considered K-pop, and it's viewed more as K-pop than it is South Korean rap or rock or things like that. So yeah. So let's move on here. So the honorable second place. Japan has been second place for a long time in the music industry, and that's not a bad thing. It really isn't. The United States being first. But they have the second largest music industry at 2.7 billion US dollars. I believe that was information from 2017. 2018 isn't over. And the US was sitting somewhere around 5.7 billion US dollars. So almost, actually, yeah, that's double the size. But Japan's only got 40% of the US population, so that's not bad. And the most popular genres are pop and rock. As I mentioned earlier, those are just two distinct genres that have actual names, J-rock and J-pop. And before we really move on, I forgot to mention that the music industry, just to put it in perspective, is actually second place among the popular culture industries in Japan. The anime industry being number one at I think 17 or 18 billion dollars recently. So that's a huge gap between first and second, but the music industry is going to come in second at 2.7. But there was a time when Japan was almost first, and there were a lot of reasons for that. And a lot of these reasons are still what keeps Japan's music industry afloat. But music was expensive in Japan. It still is. Japanese CDs are so expensive. If you look at this Girls' Generation, the best CD at the bottom, I know Girls' Generation is Korean, but the CD is being sold in Japan. 4,500 yen. That's, I mean, if, you know, the exchange rates are equal, that's about $40 $45 for a CD. And I don't care if it's the best CD. That's $45. I can barely pay that much for a video game, let alone a CD. So yeah, music was expensive. So at the time, your average CD was going to cost you about $30. And even if you thought you would go be an early adopter and go the digital route, a single would still cost you $2.50, which at the time in the U.S. I believe a single was ranging anywhere from 50 cents to a dollar. So it's a huge difference. So Japan was just getting more out of each sale that it made in terms of money, revenue coming in, revenue generated. CD and DVD prices are printed on packages. This is the reason for this was so that people couldn't compete with discounts. So all the music stores had to be fair. And so if you look on this Girls' Generation CD, you actually see that the price is printed there. So it's hard to get a discount on music, which meant that you were still getting more money for every CD sold. Obsessive Japanese collectors. Yeah, especially fans of music or any real popular culture. Special editions are an easy way for any popular culture industry in Japan to bring in money. Not too long ago, I had imported, I think, 8 Hatsune Miku PlayStation Vitas. I sold them marked up on eBay for about 3 times the original price, and they were gone within a week. So definitely, I mean, that just goes to show you that the same thing kind of exists among fans in the United States as well. But this would people would buy multiple copies of the same CD just to get the special edition, or maybe to have one to use and one not to be touched, in pristine condition. So the next reason is really, really interesting. There's little piracy in Japan. You might think, oh, the Japanese are so honest, such honest people, and that may be true, but everyone wants to save money. But the reason why piracy is so not so prevalent in Japan is that the Japanese government really went out of their way to make examples. And there are strict laws not just against uploading but downloading as well. It doesn't matter if you're making money off of it or just using it for your own personal use. There are people sitting in jail right now having this conversation. It's like, oh, what are you in for? I killed 4 people with a knife. How about you? I downloaded 4 anime songs and got caught by the Japanese police. I'm pretty sure that conversations happened somewhere. And then there was no comprehensive digital download alternatives. So iTunes, with its large library of singles, at this time in 2012, that didn't really exist in Japan. And so you had to buy physical copies, which means that maybe you only liked one song, but instead of spending, a dollar, you had to go out and buy a $30 CD, which, generated more money for the music industry in 2012. As you can imagine, later in 2013, it crashes. YouTube becomes really popular in Japan and music gets uploaded. Japan's still very strict about pulling music off of YouTube. There's a constant battle between J-pop fans and the producers of J-pop in Japan, just back and forth, putting music up, having it taken down. So yeah, Japan's done a lot to protect this industry. So it's rightfully earned second place. All right, let's move on. So the history of J-pop. I don't know if you guys remember these Now CDs. Now that's what I call music. I think they had those for American music. They have it for J-pop too. I think that's real. I don't know. It might not be. It might be fake. But referred to J-pop in and outside of Japan. So it's a domestic term as well. Which is strange. You'd think you'd call your own country's pop music just pop rather than J-pop. But the influence of the Western music industry is very strong. So it was named in the early 90s, but it originates in the 60s. So, but for our purposes, we'll say that in the 90s, that's when it really got started. So Japanese music, or at least the origins of J-pop, starts with something called Kayo Kyoku, which is lyrical singing. It was a fusion of Japanese composition, kind of Western elements included as well. It started as people just doing translated covers of Western music, and you see that pattern throughout the history of Japanese music, that a lot of genres start off initially with just doing covers of Western music, and eventually they go on to write their own lyrics, compose their own songs. Yeah. So the Beatles and group sound. So this, every country was a lot, most modern nations at the time were affected by Beatles fever. Japan was really no exception. And with it came the introduction of the rock and roll and the electric guitar. And so this is a really definitive moment for Japan, because this is when you really get the distinct genre of rock in Japan. And so there are many people in Japan who wanted to recreate this style of music but use Japanese. And so this is going to be a problem every time they try to adopt a Western genre, is the debate about, is it still valid? Is it still authentic if you sing in Japanese? Or should you sing in English? Should there be half-half? And this debate still continues with a lot of genres today, not just rock, but hip hop, rap, the authenticity of whether or not you should, that's associated with singing in Japanese or in English. That's still a problem for a lot of groups today. In J-Rock, you still see a lot of bands heavily incorporating English. For example, on the discussion board, the song "The Beginning" by One O'Clock or One Okuroku, or however you want to pronounce it, most of that song is actually in English. So I think it's about 60-40. So there you go, modern example. So the only Japanese song to top the American Billboard, actually South Korea did it. Did they top it? I'm not sure. I don't remember if BTS topped it, but Japan has only done it once, and it was a really, really long time ago. And this song is also available in the discussion board questions if you really want to look at it. It was 1963, Kyu Sakamoto's Sukiyaki. And Sukiyaki is the American title because we suck at pronouncing Japanese titles. So the original title was Ue o muite aruko. And it just means to walk with walk looking up, walk with your head up, kind of, I guess would be a good translation. The song was entirely in Japanese. Great looking guy, by the way, here. But it topped the American Billboard charts for 3 consecutive weeks. And that has never been done again. Hasn't even been topped for 1 week since this song. So the debate on whether or not the songs should be in English, if it's an originally American genre, is irrelevant. You have an example here that shows that the music doesn't have to be in English for it to do well in the United States. And, the music industry was different back then. People actually played instruments, so on and so forth. I'm starting to sound really old, but it's true. And so just listen to the song. It's actually one of my favorite songs from this era. So yeah, let's move on here. So rock music comes back with the electronic synthesizers. And so you have iconic groups that kind of really solidify the genre in Japan. So you have Yellow Magic Orchestra, focused on electronic sounds. And I guess they formed the foundation of what would later be called city pop in the 80s. This is a subgenre of pop music. And then you have the Southern All-Stars that proved that successful rock music could be sung in all Japanese. So they did their music entirely in Japanese, and it did well in Japan anyway. And it wasn't, normally people associate rock with men, But there were very successful female bands, one of the most successful being Princess Princess here on the right. Uh, Very 80s look there. Um, but yeah, and even to this day, there are plenty of all-female rock bands. I think there's one popular one recently called Band Maid. It's a bad pun. Uh, like a band maid, but like maid in a band, but all the members are dressed up as maids. So Japan's pretty clever with taking Western musical concepts and putting a Japanese twist on it. Same goes for Baby Metal, taking metal music, which is primarily European, and turning it into something, incorporating kawaii and producing something that was, has experienced a great deal of success. In the late 80s, you get Visual K, and you might think, oh, visual, right? It's like K-pop. No, it's not. Although they do focus on appearance and theatrics, music is actually very important for Visual K as well. It's considered a subgenre of rock. And this actually has the opposite effect that K-pop has for me. I actually like Visual K more when I can't see them. Something about the look just, I mean, they look cool, but you'll see when we get to the next slide, more of the modern Visual K groups. But X Japan, which is shown here, still famous to this day, one of the greatest Visual K groups to ever do it. So here's what they look like. So this is a little bit much for me. Just not my thing. Yeah. But the music sounds great. I'm a big fan of the musical content, just not the visuals. So the end of Matsuda and the beginning of Komuro. So there was a Kaio Kyoku artist, the number one artist of all time of that genre of music, the lyrical singing era, Seiko Matsuda. And this name may seem familiar to you because she was just part of our last lecture when we were just discussing kawaii and Buriko, where she was kind of the innovator of that cute persona that accompanies the kawaii aesthetic. And she actually had 24 number one singles in a row on the Oricon chart. And that streak was ended. And the ending of that streak actually meant the death for Kaio Kyoku as a genre. And many of the artists actually retired to produce, which the next direction for the Japanese music industry, which was going to be the idol culture, the idol industry. And so the Japanese music aesthetic changed to this idol style where it was more of a girl next door look. And there were artists who challenged this, like Akina Nakamori. She did sexy visuals, had songs about heartbreak, betrayal, so on and so forth. But it really just didn't work out for her. And I think later on she had a suicide attempt, which really further went on to hurt her popularity. So Seiko Matsuda is going to be dethroned by TM Network's invincible producer, Komuro Tetsuya, with his Gravity of Love. And here he is here. I had a better picture of him. I think this is the picture where he announced his retirement, actually. He's had that same hair color for a really long time. So the Japanese pop golden era from the 80s to the 90s. So this transition, like I said, from Kaio Kyoku to female idol production. And then the term J-pop becomes official, and Japan is actually an economic superpower at this time. Everything's going well, just like you would remember from the 9 or 10 minute Japanese history video. And this is when it establishes itself as the second largest music industry in the world. And a lot of this was supported by the famous Japanese tie-in that we called to increase the size of the music industry. So I'm sure you've seen this before, but the use of newly released songs in commercials, anime, dramas, video games to produce sales. So you might not be a fan of this particular artist, you might not even know about this artist, but combined with the visuals of your favorite anime, your favorite genre or video game, gets you exposure to this artist and leads you to go out and buy a $30 CD. And so this has been going on for a really long time, and it's proven to be very successful. This is something that you don't really see in the US too often. Sometimes, but not really. electronic music of the 90s. So 90s are still dominated by the invincible producer Tetsuya Komuro. Sold over 170 million albums and still to this day the most successful producer in Japanese history. So he did things like Eurobeat, trance, other dance genres. So again, genres that originally came from Europe. But he took popular songs and did Eurobeat and electronic remixes. So I mean, it's a great idea because you don't really have to come up with something new. You just have to change the shape of something that's already exists. And it's easy. You know that if you take a popular song and make it better, that it'll probably be popular once you're done with it. Doesn't always work, but generally it does. So Komuro eventually is going to be succeeded by female artists, a resurgence of idols in the late 90s. Um, in particular, Utada Hikaru being one of the most well known. If you didn't know, she was actually born in New York, and so that's where kind of the heavy R&B influence comes from, which was new to J-pop at the time. There wasn't really much R&B in the J-pop industry. You also get Koda Kumi trying to do it as well. And she doesn't really succeed until her album called Best. That's the name of the album. But she was also one of the, I guess, first to really kind of break this girl next door image and embrace something that's a little more sexy, a little more something that's not so what's the word I'm looking for? I guess childish. I guess. So Utada's her debut album is going to be First Love. Great song, by the way. Look it up. You'll notice that none of her songs are on my list. The list would be super long if I put them all on there. So she sold over 7 million copies and is actually the best-selling Japanese album ever. Her song Automatic was the first to use Kimi for boyfriend instead of Anata. If you know anything about Japanese language, it's kind of a big deal. And she did the commercial and theme song for Square Enix's Disney's Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, and now 3. And she's definitely got some negotiating power there with Disney, who I don't even want to know how much they had to pay her to actually do the theme song for the third sequel in the series. But yeah. But she didn't go unchallenged. The idol Ayumi Hamasaki, her success period was late 90s, early 2000s. She sold millions of copies of every album she ever put out, even her remix albums. And she was going to be the one who broke Matsuda Seiko's most consecutive #1 singles as a female artist anyway. And she is actually the best-selling female artist of all time in Japan. And this is really something. It's really hard to stay relevant in Asian music industry in general. It just seems like there's always someone new, something new coming out. I think it's maybe a little easier to stay relevant in the United States. After that, you get these multi-member female groups, which you have a reading on, and you have the documentary, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But it's kind of pioneered by producer Tsunku and Morning Musume. It's kind of one of the first groups to do it. They had multiple generations, so members graduate and get replaced. This kind of ensures that the group never dies. So what are the benefits of that? You get to ride the success of previous generations. Now, it's a lot easier than starting a new group. You have to get their name out there. It's Morning Musume again and again and again. You don't have to remarket new artists. And so the problem with graduations is it causes minor decrease in popularity due to fan loyalty. Fans are very loyal to their idols, as you'll see in the video, but that's not necessarily a problem because, as you'll see with the AKB48 elections, as represented in the videos as well, that people much rather prefer to support an up-and-coming artist and idol than to support someone who's already famous. there's a sense of enjoyment and fulfillment there, supporting someone in the very beginning and helping them grow as you feel like maybe you're growing together with the idol. Um, so you can maybe claim that you're one of the original supporters of that person. But AKB48's elections is just a really clever way to get people to spend money. It's very simple. You buy a CD and you get a vote. You buy more than one CD, you get another vote. And so I'm sure you can see what's going on here. Voting power is linked to economic power, spending power. And so you have some really diehard fans out there who will go out and spend thousands and thousands of dollars to ensure that their favorite person will get one of the top spots in AKB48. Uh, yeah, I think it's borderline exploitation, but you know. Mm. So we've been talking a lot about female artists, and that's because there aren't very many factories, let's say, producers of the male idol in Japan. But the Johnny's and Associates in the late 90s became the male idol factory of Japan. They don't have much competition. The late 80s, they had their first success with a rollerblading group called Hikaru Genji. If you don't know, that's named after a historical character. And the former members of that are going to form SMAP, which brought in a lot of sales in the mid 90s. And so they went on later to produce Arashi, News, Hey, Say, Jump, Kanjani 8, maybe Sexy Zone as well. And basically dominated the sales of 2000s and even during this decade as well. And it's actually one of the few groups that is guaranteed to make money. Anything that Johnny's and Associates puts out is just guaranteed to make money. And so if you take a look at the picture here with Arashi, you've got a bunch of beautiful men who look like they're about to go to work. It's very similar to the idea of the idol in South Korea, where you're not just selling how they look, you're not just selling the music that they perform, but you're selling their personality as well. And so that's very important. The persona, the character of these artists is watched very carefully. And so I think you guys have a chapter on Johnny's and Associates as well, so I don't want to spoil everything, but that's just a small overview. There is a small mention of hip hop in Japan, but it's not really hip hop. You have a few artists to really try and do hip hop, but it's still kind of a mix of J-pop, hip hop put together, much like South Korea does it. So I don't have a slide for it. So I actually managed to keep the lecture under 30 minutes this time. Yay! So be on the lookout for those test grades and your overall grades being updated as well. Don't forget that your bibliography and outline assignments are due this week or either next week. So make sure you look at the examples, look at the video on how to do annotations. A lot of people, I don't think, got it. I don't think a lot of people understood that an academic source is either a book or a journal article, maybe even a documentary. But if it comes from a news article or a newspaper, that's considered a journalistic source, not necessarily an academic source. So be careful with that. It doesn't mean that you can't use them, but make sure that you look at the guidelines for the assignment. Make sure you look at the feedback on your discussion board for that particular week. And I will see you guys in the next lecture, and I hope you enjoy the documentary on Tokyo Idols. See you.